Alright, so I'm back with another video, and in this one I want to talk about just tying together a few of the topics that I've been touching upon in the last three actually. And that has to do with ego, desire, and shadow work and emotional, the resolution of emotional hang-ups. Okay, and maybe one nice place to start is this entire idea of our desire for freedom and feeling complete, right? And that's an interesting one, and it became super interesting to me to see something that I suspected all along, but it was confirmed in this last trip to Lake Atitlan, in which I met this really cool guy called Ajna. And man, I mean, we got into some really nice conversations with him and exploring all kinds of things about stuff that happened in our lives, spiritual experiences that we've had, and so on. And we were talking 2 days ago, and now if you look at him, and I actually said that out loud, and it caused a little bit of laughter actually, because the guy was, if you look at him, he's got he's dressed a bit like a hippie, right? He's very alternative. He's got like a big beard and all kinds of cool jewelry and things like that, and a funny sort of hippie-ish hat and stuff. And he's literally nomadic at the moment. He has no home, so he's staying at the Yoga Forest Hotel, which is not a bad way to roll, if I have to say so myself. But in essence, the guy just lives there and makes music, right? And he's a really sweet guy and very, very cool person. We connected very well. And but he was saying something that made it plainly clear that his degree of freedom, the degree of freedom that he experiences, is no bigger than mine, and in some cases maybe even lower, for all we know, right? And I said to him, you know what, man, this is the kind of thing that I've suspected all along, and I wasn't poking fun at him by any means, by the way, but it was just like, isn't it funny that I am the dude that has a corporate job and feels like he's tied into these responsibilities, whatever, but I'm cultivating this internal freedom, and he is the nomadic dude who's left everything, doesn't have an address, and stuff, and left Spain for Guatemala to go and do whatever. But the moment to moment freedom that he feels is very limited actually. And I thought that was a big revelation, and we all found it funny actually, right? Like, I'm the corporate clown, he's the hippie, but I'm the free spirit. And this ties back to some of the topics that we were talking about in previous videos, especially the one of doing the emotional release work. Okay. And it's funny when you see places like the Yoga Forest or San Marcos Atitlan, which is a very spiritual town. There's a lot of people, everywhere you turn, there's people talking about these subjects, right? That's the kind of town it is. Small little town, very spiritual, lots of people doing it. However, the ones who actually get it are very, very few. And I think part of the reason for it is just the sheer diversity of modalities that are out there. There's Reiki this, there's the healing sound whatever, there's the smoke ceremony of the cocoa bean, right? You name it, it's there, and it's just a plethora of things that you can do, and little rituals and ceremonies and cleanses and whatever. And yet really only one thing counts, and that is finding the self. And once the self is found, to then do the shadow work to clear all the muck out, and you can only do it on your own. Now there may be people, and I have met my pranayama teacher Arno, for example, who featured in the channel at some point, who are very good at teasing out trauma and helping it get resolved. But as far as I'm concerned, the resolution, the actual triggering and resolution of trauma is the only game in town. Because anything else might give you a huge high, or you'll be singing Kumbaya and feel like, man, the energy here is amazing, bro, right? You're like on top of the world and stuff, and the second you're gone, you leave the place, the energy is gone as well, because it was all depending on the little ritual or whatever to make you forget for a while that your traumas are lurking underneath the surface, ready to be triggered. And those traumas lurking underneath the surface is the very thing that keeps your vibration at a certain level, no matter how high you push it during these little events and stuff, as if by I was gonna say osmosis, but it's not. Homeostasis is the word I'm looking for. There's a certain homeostasis back to which you revert because of the unresolved stuff, without which you would be in higher states of awareness. So it is the resolution of trauma, the actual shadow work and bringing it up and getting it resolved, that will actually increase your vibration in a sustainable way, in a methodical, sort of guess-free, right? So you don't have to. There's no guesswork involved in this. You just have to do the nasty work, essentially, right? And so it comes back to this whole idea that the externals are aids to that, right? The place that you're at, the people you surround yourself with, the things that you entertain in your mind or whatever are aids to this. But ultimately, it is only whether the traumas are getting resolved or not that counts for lifting your frequency higher and higher all the time. And anything else is a little bit of sort of just you're playing spirituality, but you're not really attacking the problem. The other thing that is interesting is going back to the book that I was talking about in another video, Letting Go by David Hawkins, is how the resolution of the traumas is the thing that dissolves the ego, because the ego is nothing but a series or a layered protective mechanism to prevent those sore spots from being touched. So if you have a sore spot about, say, daddy never loving you or whatever, then you're going to become a workaholic to try to earn that in a kind of roundabout type of way. And part of your ego is going to be, oh, I'm a guy who works really hard or whatever, right? You're going to identify with that. Now, the identification is not accidental, right? Like, we tend to think like, oh, consciousness identifies with the ego and this and that. Well, yeah, that's true, right? In the ultimate analysis, you want to get rid of like all levels of identification, but you'll never even skim the surface of that if you don't resolve the traumas, because the ego is there to protect you from those traumas being re-triggered at random. So you create like this entire armor, which is also a prison, right? Now, you can try to take stabs at the armor by going like, oh, I shouldn't identify with this. Oh, why do I keep identifying with that? Or you can resolve the trauma, and once there's no sore spot to protect, the armor in front of it dissolves all by itself, actually. So if you want to get rid of your ego, the way to do it is to resolve your hang-ups, to let them be felt fully, and once fully felt, realize that they can't kill you, and that the sore spot starts to become less sore over time, and therefore no armor is needed on that area. And funny enough, and this is also another thing that David Hawkins mentions in his book, is that once you've resolved your fear about one thing, the entire mechanism of fear starts to unravel, right? Now, if the fear you resolve is a particularly intense one, that unraveling can happen extremely fast. So there's stories about people who resolve a single phobia or this limiting belief that they had, and suddenly that's just a kind of snowball effect just takes over, and it starts to spill into every domain of life, because now you've seen the meta fear, so to speak, or you've seen the essence of what fear is, as opposed to giving it a specific flavor of fear of this or fear of that. You start to see a recurring pattern of like, oh, now I know what that energy is in and of itself, in its essence, and I learn to resolve that energy, and therefore all fears start to erode. And when fears erode, ego erodes. It's a natural. It's an indirect but beautiful, very effective and almost mathematical way to get this done. But you have to do the work. You got to do all the nasty work, all the shadow work to do this. And in order to do the shadow work, you are well advised to realize to get a glimpse of what the higher self is in the first place, because otherwise you have no center from which to bear the hammer blows of emotional episodes that are going to come once you start doing this kind of work, right? If you lack a center, you are entirely vulnerable to emotional dysregulation, as a matter of fact. And I would even say it's well advised not to be doing this kind of thing, because well, essentially you're not ready for it, right? So you need to find the center of the self, the knower, the vantage point, or the knowing rather. And from that vantage point, once you've identified and you realize that it's a neutral essence of you which can't be touched by emotion, because it's totally transparent and timeless, then you can engage in the nasty stuff, because you know that center is there, and that you can regain it at any point once you've allowed yourself to feel the emotion completely. All right. Now, what happens to most people is the opposite, right? They become experts at creating a very refined ego that gets richer all the time and more entrenched, and they avoid going into ugly emotions, and justifiably so, I would say, especially if you're not ready. But they're not even aware that these things are lurking there, right? You're gonna be pulled by your ego left, right, and center, if you're not aware that it's there, and that it's being triggered by all those little sore emotions lurking underneath. So I'm not gonna lie to you, it takes courage, and in fact, in David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, courage is the level at which the turning point begins, because you need to be kind of fed up and then go, you know what, I'm gonna go into this now, whatever happens, right? Like I'm just gonna go into the ugliness in me and the pain, and you know, whatever is there, I'm simply gonna go into it, because you start to feel that the price to pay for not doing it is too big. So that ties a lot of these things together, right? So we talked about sort of the illusion of freedom that you can engage in by, you know, becoming a hippie or leaving your day job to do whatever, and whereas the real freedom lies in being free from your hang-ups, so that the decisions you take are never driven from fear, but rather the desire to create and to share. So that's a major one. That is what real freedom actually means. Anything else is just a caricature of freedom, and you see it a lot. The other one that we talked about is the tendency of the yogi or the hippie or the sort of free spirit to get caught in the, cornucopia of modalities of healing, some of which give you a high, but you inevitably revert back to your homeostatic state of consciousness because you haven't really resolved anything. Okay, so that's why you chase all these highs one after the next. You get addicted to the spiritual high, but your base level hasn't moved an inch, right? So you keep getting pulled back by the unresolved trauma. And we talked about how the dissolution or integration of trauma actually resolves the ego, because the ego is nothing but a protective mechanism or a shield to prevent sore spots in your psyche from getting triggered. And therefore you have a chance of actually dissolving your ego if you systematically engage in letting the emotions be felt with full surrender and equanimity. So that if you did nothing else, according to David Hawking, you would actually become enlightened, which is what happened to him. Right? That is the royal road to enlightenment and ego dissolution is the clearing of your psychic dirt, right? So that enlightenment doesn't contain any real magic sauce. It is an explainable process. It is another thing to say that you can fully control it, or that you should even try. And it's another thing to say that you can be aware of how that process is running, because much of the progress that is happening may be happening under the threshold of your conscious awareness, but it's happening nonetheless. And the controllable part of it, right, or the voluntary surrender to any emotion that comes up, and maybe even the voluntary triggering of trauma, is the kind of work that that will inevitably lead to your ego becoming dissolved if you are only diligent enough about doing this, because it's just mechanics. It's 101. You do the trauma resolution, and the ego has served its purpose. It becomes, it's just a silly, like once the war is over and there's nobody to poke you with a spear, to be walking around with a heavy and warm armor is ridiculous, right? Like your mind will simply know not to do it anymore. It dissolves on its own in that sense. And I must attest to the fact that since the realization of the self and the shadow work that I've been doing, I feel better every single day. As a matter of fact, I feel that the progress has become truly exponential now. And once that happens, you also don't want to stop, right? Now, that's not to say that I'm always in the mood and ready to tackle whatever's coming up. I'm not quite there yet. Often I still feel like, ooh, that thing, no, don't want it now, right? Push it down for later or whatever. But it's done also with awareness, right? So now I'm like, okay, well, there's a little sore area that we're gonna have to revisit or whatever. And I've been even considering to start a diary again, to take a note of these things and actually start doing that, because I think that the payoff is just humongous, right? It's everything. You get everything in return. So so that the price to pay is not that high in the end, I think. So that was the video on freedom, on modalities of healing, and what is the real deal, and on the resolution of trauma as the actual thing that dissolves the ego in an indirect way, as opposed to trying really hard not to have desires or not to identify with this or that. Identification is happening as a protective mechanism in response to something that needs to be protected. So I hope that helps, and I hope I'm back with more pretty soon.